I'd like to call the meeting of the Environmental Commission to order. Ms. Drennan, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Commissioner Graham? Commissioner, Chair Needham?
Here.
Councilmember Smith? Present. Commissioner Slavic? Here. Commissioner Mursky?
Present.
Commissioner Appel?
Here.
Commissioner Rigo?
Present.
Commissioner Gibb Randall?
Here.
Councilmember Bannister?
Here.
Commissioner Kellewart?
Here.
Commissioner Brown?
Present.
Commissioner Hutton?
Here.
And Vice Chair Skinner? Absent. Okay. You have a quorum.
First order of business is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And next up is the approval of our minutes from the October 25th meeting. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Second. Any additions or corrections other than ones that have already been made on Legistar? All in favor of approving?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Next up, we have public commentary. Are any members of the public here wishing to speak to the commission? If you do, please just come up front to the microphone. Please state your name for the record, and we'd ask that you confine your remarks to 3 minutes.
I'm sorry. I'm not going to try and use that. Go ahead.
Hi there. So, my name is David Schoenberger, Schonberger, and I live in the city of Ann Arbor, currently in Ward 5, formerly in Ward 1. And I'm here today to register my support for the Environmental Commission's proposed resolution, which I helped to write, urging the City Council to advocate that our state and federal governments should provide Ann Arbor residents with an expanded level of public health protection for improved emergency preparedness consistent with newly strengthened Canadian standards. Better population level protection is warranted as a Fukushima lessons learned measure, given the potential for an accident at the Fermi nuclear power plant in southeast Michigan. Today's special presentation to the Environmental Commission is a collective effort supported by multiple organizations. Thank you all for listening, and we look forward to your feedback. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else here for public comment?
Hi, I'm Jeff Ellison. Hi, Mike. I've lived in Ann Arbor for 40 years and recently retired from the US EPA, where I work to reduce vehicle pollution. I thank you all for your public service. I also strongly support the proposed resolution, which urges City Council to endorse the American Thyroid Association's call for a strategic stockpile of potassium iodide tablets throughout the 50-mile radius from the Fermi 2 nuclear power plant, which includes Ann Arbor. Potassium iodide tablets are a simple, cheap, and proven protection against radioactive iodine, which is particularly dangerous to children and pregnant women. Local stockpiling is critical so that residents can be protected immediately after any kind of nuclear emergency. Ann Arbor residents deserve the same common sense protection that Canada provides its citizens who live within 50 miles of nuclear plants. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else for public commentary? Okay, there will be another opportunity for public commentary at the very end of the meeting. Under unfinished business, we have consideration of our commission bylaws that was introduced at our last meeting. As One item in the bylaws that we're presumably adopting here, or considering at least, is following Robert's Rules of Order, which do state for a resolution to be considered that we should make a motion to adopt and a second, and then discussion following, which we haven't always done. I think I may have dropped the ball on that, so I'm going to try to be good about that going forward. So before we get into anything, do we have a motion to approve the Environmental Commission bylaws? Thank you.
Happily.
A second? Great. So is there any further discussion or further amendments to the bylaws? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. On to new business, and we do have a special presentation about nuclear emergency planning.
Should I maybe introduce the topic very briefly?
Feel free.
Several months ago, I was approached by Jeff Olson, who just spoke during the public comments, if Ann Arbor would consider, and specifically the Environmental Commission, taking up a resolution in support of increased emergency preparedness and you can say public health protections for Ann Arbor residents specifically, but also obviously for southeastern Michigan and the state living near nuclear power plants. But this would also obviously protect residents for any type of nuclear event, for example, if there was a dirty bomb or anything else. And so after a lot of joint work, emails, phone conferences, trading of resolutions. We're at the point where we are tonight. You've hopefully all received the documents and had a chance to look at them. But I'd like to introduce Paul Gunter, who actually flew in from Washington, D.C. area to be able to present this evening. And he's going to introduce the topic, and then hopefully we can have some good discussion on the topic before we consider the resolution, or as we consider the resolution. So, Paul?
Thank you, John. Let's see.
Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit
Yes.
better than I did.
Let me see here. First slide.
From the beginning. There you go.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you. Again, my name is Paul Gunter. I'm director of the Reactor Oversight Project with Beyond Nuclear. Beyond Nuclear is a public interest advocacy group. We're based in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. I've been covering the nuclear issue both from the nuclear weapons and nuclear power side since 1975. But in our current capacity, one of the issues that we have been following closely is the idea of emergency planning, and particularly the advent of revelations following the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident in Japan in March of 2011, which sparked a lot of review of current emergency preparedness around nuclear power stations. As you're all aware, the city of Ann Arbor is 30 to 35 miles away from the Fermi nuclear power station. You see it there with the asterisks. There are essentially two emergency planning zones around, typically for U.S. nuclear power stations, there is a 10-mile evacuation planning zone. The darker circle around the Fermi plant there, which is located in Monroe, Michigan, and then a much larger 50-mile ingestion pathway zone marked by the outer rim there. And you see the location of the Fermi plant there. This particular emergency planning zone is in fact unique in that it spans an international border between Canada and the United States, and thus divided between the jurisdictions and oversight of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and the states of Michigan and Ohio and the Ontario provincial government. So it's quite unique. There are a few other nuclear power stations along the Canadian nuclear power station, but just in U.S. terminology, I've described the evacuation planning zone, which is 0 to 10 miles, and then the ingestion pathway, which is 10 to 50 miles. In Canadian terms, that's the primary zone within 0 to 10, and the secondary zone within 10 to 50. And I think that the unique moment that we're here tonight is to consider what is in fact a medical community consensus, that the predistribution of potassium iodide, or Ki as it's commonly referred, is a safe, effective, and essential adjunct action to evacuation, sheltering, and avoiding contaminated food and water following a nuclear incident, which could range from a nuclear accident at a power facility, a dirty bomb, or in fact, nuclear war. So, let's see. Obviously, the consideration of this resolution falls clearly in your area of concern and focus, and so you know, we're quite pleased that you're here with the idea of not only building a safe community in context of this particular issue, but also the idea of preparedness and resilience to the advent of admittedly a rare event, but one that clearly needs to be considered and prepared for. The concern, of course, is that the Enrico Fermi nuclear power station, which is the subject of the focus tonight here, is practically identical in design and materials to the Fukushima Daiichi facility that you see these two pictures here. This is a particularly controversial design. I won't go into any great detail at this juncture, but the multiple containment failure at Fukushima Daiichi demonstrated that this is a vulnerable design, and while the circumstances of the Fukushima Daiichi accident were clearly unique, the problem, of course, is that there is a design flaw in the Mark I boiling water reactor design, that the containment essentially is too small. And this has been known since 1972, acknowledged by both the Atomic Energy Commission and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So what we're here to do tonight is to say that nuclear accidents are credible, and therefore preparedness is justified. This is just a quick review of the far-reaching consequences of a nuclear accident. The Chernobyl facility, obviously, of a different design, a graphite moderated reactor, again, with a questionable containment from the very beginning. But the consequences of that accident were far-reaching. What you're looking here at is two maps, one of Chernobyl, one of Fukushima Daiichi. These are radioactive deposition maps of radioactive fallout, principally cesium-134 and 137. This is particulate, but the concern here tonight is about the spread of radioactive iodine, which is a gas. While you can't see this gas and its deposition can't be mapped out, it is highly mobile. So what you're seeing in terms of the heavier particulate fallout, the gas preceded this fallout, and consequently raises the concern that public preparedness needs to be done in advance. The population needs to be educated and prepared, because time is going to be of the essence in addressing the public mitigation and for public health and safety. So, you know, once considered incredible, we've now seen demonstrated effects of the far-reaching effects and long-lasting effects. But for iodine-131, we're essentially talking about an 8-day half-life. So typically, you're looking at 10 half-lives for the biological effect of a particular radioactive isotope. So, you know, 80 days is the biological impact for radioactive iodine. The situation is that stable iodine is an essential nutrient that is used to produce thyroid hormones that are essential to human development and metabolism. However, the thyroid itself cannot distinguish between stable iodine and radioactive iodine. And so the uptake of radioactive iodine increases the risk of thyroid cancer and metabolic disorders, particularly in children, infants, and the fetus. And so the youngest bear the greatest risk and consequences. So the whole idea of issuing potassium iodide is if it's ingested in time, it provides for a prophylactic effect to the thyroid gland and saturates the gland with stable iodine and thereby blocks the uptake. So the idea is that this is a safe, effective, and affordable and justified prophylactic action that's been proven safe by the World Health Organization and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. More recently, the American Thyroid Association has been referenced, has said that the pre-distribution of potassium iodide for ingestion immediately following a nuclear accident is an essential adjunct to evacuation, sheltering, and avoiding contaminated food, milk, and water. This was published by the American Thyroid Association in their publication Thyroid in July of 2017. We've been working with the American Thyroid Association to educate the public and its representatives on the importance of upgrading emergency preparedness in the United States for the medical community's recognition that this particular prophylactic action is timely. So in their scientific statement, again in July of 2017, they defined the emergency planning zone, again in 2 zones, the 0 to 10 mile radius for the distribution of KI in advance or pre-distribute to individual households with extra stockpiles at emergency reception centers beyond the 10-mile evacuation zone. They are also recommending that the secondary zone, the ingestion pathway zone, 10 to 50-mile radius, to stockpile potassium iodide in local public facilities such as schools, hospitals, clinics, police and fire stations, community centers for distribution upon notification by local officials. Now, this is the second time that the American Thyroid Association has reached out to lobby legislature and the emergency planning officials on the benefits and advantages that potassium iodide brings. But this is the updated version that they now have out. So this was again most recently updated on November 28th, 2018 by the American Academy on Pediatrics. and I'll quote from their policy paper, just out now less than a week, and it says, quote, "Because treatment of KI should be commenced immediately before or during the passage of a radioactive cloud in an event which radioiodines are released, KI supplies need to be stored where readily available to the public. Storage in the National Strategic Stockpile will not allow for timely distribution of materials. KI should be stockpiled in hospitals, public health departments, and other local facilities." So that is gives you an idea of a medical consensus. However, on a regulatory level, following the Fukushima Daiichi accident, a number of federal and national regulatory bodies around the world began to review the emergency planning around nuclear power stations. In February 8th of 2016, after review, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is responsible for emergency planning and oversees the regulatory oversight of U.S. reactors, they approved a staff recommendation that no further regulatory action is needed for expanding emergency planning zone for KI prophylaxis around U.S. nuclear power facilities. So no action was taken on the part of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for the Enrico Fermi Nuclear Power Station or any other of the 97 other nuclear power stations here in the United States. So currently, as it stands, KI is only stockpiled within the 10-mile emergency planning zone, the evacuation planning zone, and it is being made available to the population that asks for it, and on designated days, there are distribution centers open within the evacuation planning zone where a member of the public in the evacuation zone can take a voucher that's delivered to them in the mail, and then they can exchange it for a free dose for their household. Under the current, there are medical reviews here in the state of Michigan that on last count, only about 16% of the population within the 10-mile radius around the Fermi nuclear power station actually takes advantage of that availability. And that's in part due because there's not an effective education program, but it does stand in sharp contrast to what happened in Canada, where, again, the Fermi nuclear power station, its emergency planning zone, extends into southern Ontario. In 2014, in fact, what happened was that the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, which oversees Canadian reactors, these are by different design, of course, these are CANDU reactors, and the Ontario Provincial Nuclear Emergency Response Plan by the provincial government, they drafted a 2014 review of emergency planning around Canadian reactors, and they essentially said that the population needs to be better protected, looking at the what happened in Fukushima. And so what they did was they mandated that by 2015, populations within 6 miles of Canadian reactors would have KI delivered directly to their homes, and that populations out to 30 miles would have stockpiles in strategic areas that would make it readily available to the population upon notification by officials to be prepared and to distribute it. And also, if you're Canadian, you can, if you're within 30 miles, you can request that KI be delivered to your home on request. that plan was then updated in 2016 by petition from local governments in Southern Ontario to have it equal protection for Canadians from U.S. reactors. And so in December of 2017, Canadians around in the Fermi zone, in the Davis-Besse nuclear power station, and in the Perry nuclear power station have been receiving potassium iodide both within the 10-mile EPZ and the 50-mile. So Canada harmonized their emergency planning to the emergency planning that the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission uses for their for our nuclear power stations. That is the state of play currently. So here you see this is from the Canadian nuclear power station, or from the U.S. nuclear power station in Fermi. The provincial plan for the town of Amherstburg, Ontario. This is the primary zone. People are getting KI delivered directly to their home addresses in this zone. And so this would be within the 10-mile radius. Here you see the 50-mile radius into southern Ontario. So we have now Windsor and Essex and Amherstburg, and the most recent addition is in Chatham, where you see the asterisk there. So that's right at the 50-mile line. And they're going to be filling in these other zones as this is now a mandate. So here you see the whole issue as it's playing out right now. Actually, within the last few days, Ontario's also started the distribution for the Perry nuclear power station, which is further to the east of this map, but the 50-mile EPZ does extend into southern Ontario for beach cottages. So the Canadian government is taking this pre-distribution very seriously in protecting its public's health from the event of a nuclear accident at the Fermi nuclear power station. So,
Sir, I don't mean to cut you off, but we do have a packed agenda tonight. Could
yes,
we?
Okay, and so I think that covers mine.
Okay, thanks a
And
lot.
I appreciate your time.
Do the commissioners have any questions?
So first question is, when you talk about the dosage that everybody would take, they just take one pill, or do they take one pill a day, or do they take one?
It's one pill a day, and the dosage varies on adult and child or infant. So these are FDA-approved doses.
So when you're talking about stockpiling enough, do we have an idea of the amount that we need within the area, or at least within the city?
It would be for every, I mean, the key is children, infants, pregnant women, and so the youngest populations are the most at risk.
Okay, so the short answer to my question is we don't have a specific number on how many doses we need. I mean, it varies, of course, but, you know.
It'll depend on your census data.
Sure. Second question, has there been any discussions with the hospital about stockpiling this at all? No? Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
So I'll just draw your attention to this last slide, just so that the idea is that the state of Michigan is responsible for the through the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So this is sort of a two-phase ask that the state of Michigan get involved, and then the funding for the stockpiling and distribution would be through the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission through an increase in licensing fees that would be done through Code of Federal Regulation.
Yeah, so Ann Arbor itself would not administer this program.
Thank you for your time.
Go, yeah.
Oh,
Mr.
okay.
Keller?
So a lot of my medication's expired. How stable is this? Like if we get stockpile now and something happens in 10 years, are all those pills any good, or?
I think that the shelf life is 10 years for KI.
And can we go and buy our own supply somewhere?
You can buy KI online. But see, the important point here is about public education,
Right.
in that it needs to come with it's clearly instructions. You know, while KI is safe, there are some instances of allergic reaction. So you don't want to take KI without without direction through through emergency notification. But it clearly, according to the FDA and what we've seen to date, is that the prophylactic benefits far outweigh the risk.
And our county health department, which is very active, is not capable of triggering the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to help us?
The way it's set up right now is that the KI distribution, while covered by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission through licensing fees, is voluntary on a state-by-state basis. We had 3 Mile Island in 1979. We weren't prepared for that accident. KI did arrive in Harrisburg days after the accident, but it arrived in bulk dose, and the individual bottles, the caps didn't match. So we weren't prepared. That was 1979. Michigan did not sign on voluntarily to KI until 2010. So there's a serious lag time right now behind emergency preparedness and education, both of the officials and population, and that's where we're striving to update preparedness.
I guess I'd like to follow on that. Has there been outreach to the county health department? Because that seems like the appropriate actor here and parallels what was done in Canada at the county health level. So I'm wondering, why are we approaching this as a city activity rather than a county level health department activity?
Well, at this time, the county recognizes the 10-mile EPZ through voluntary pickup. But their own reports provided to the American Medical Association shows that the penetration's not there. So the county health department is aware that KI penetration on a voluntary level is not making it to the populations within the immediate area. Given the actions by the Canadian government and the Canadian nuclear regulator, expanding that has not penetrated to the county health department level at this time. So what we're appealing to the municipal governments is that it's important to begin lobbying for the protection and the preparedness of your communities, where that's not happening now at a county health level. And it's principally being driven by the fact that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has not taken on the impetus to harmonize internationally with what we've seen here occurring in Canada, where now we see inequity. And so this is essentially what we're here to do tonight, is to educate this municipal body that your population is facing inequity in terms of the protection that's being provided, the same common radiological hazard that's out there. It just depends on if your jurisdiction is in Canada or if you're in the United States, but it's all going to matter on which way the wind is blowing. And so this is the dialogue that we think we need to stimulate at a municipal level, not just here, but this will need to occur in Detroit, Toledo. It needs to be a much broader dialogue now that means that state, municipal, and public level education has to happen.
This is principally, a resolution in favor of advocacy. And as Paul said, what we see happening is that this would be taken up by other municipalities, it would be taken up by the county, and the intent is that it would bring pressure to bear on the state of Michigan to look at this more seriously and ultimately decide on how this should be handled. And we're basically just adding our voice to say, hey, this is something that needs to be addressed. We favor that this be implemented, and the county health department and other entities would certainly be encouraged to step in after acting here in Ann Arbor.
Last question. So does this take an act of the legislature, or is this an administrative health department thing in the state?
The state makes the decision. So, right now, 25 of 35 eligible states are taking advantage of free KI through the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So there are a number of states that have taken no action at all, even for first responders. So, this is it's a situation where public and municipal governments are they're really not being informed. So, right now, after the fact, this latest being the accident at Fukushima, there's more interest in at government levels to begin to take more effective action. And so it could be legislated, but the state of Michigan, through the Department of Public Health, they could also take advantage. And so, again, as John's raised, is that this is going to take an advocacy position on the behalf of your constituents.
Got it.
Commissioner Mirsky, I think you have a resolution you would like to bring forward.
I'm sorry.
Well, I just had a question about the community education materials. Have any of those been developed yet that other communities are using?
Well, the Canadian government, as they developed their distribution plan, they have the distribution materials includes a kit that comes with instructions. It includes a package that induces you to open it and read the instructions. But again, the American Thyroid Association is active in this advocacy as well. So the package would carry the American Thyroid Association's improvement and instructions.
Thank you.
So I would move that we have a resolution in our packet, and I would make a motion that we consider the resolution, and hoping that someone might second it, and we could then have a discussion.
Second.
Discussion on the resolution.
This is probably the cheapest thing that we could do in case of a nuclear emergency to protect the public, especially young children. By my back of the envelope calculations, it's only about 2 cents per course of treatment per person. So it's fairly cheap. My question is just, what do we need to do if who has the power to make this happen? And it sounds like it's the county or the state health department right now. So I don't know what avenues the city has to influence the state health department. That's probably administered through the governor. So we'll have a change of governor pretty soon. So maybe this is something we could bring up, or to get our state representatives to bring up with the governor.
My assumption is that if this were to pass this commission and pass city council, then this would be something that could then also be lobbied on behalf of the city through our lobbying agency or agent, whatever the proper term is.
Any other discussion?
As I look at the resolution, I don't see any mention of county government at all here, which I think should be shoehorned in there in some way, shape, or form to be able to try to get them on board, and also the public health apparatus that also exists in the county as well.
I second that friendly amendment, hopefully.
Just trying to think where we can include that
Second paragraph, probably.
second one, therefore?
That'd be State of Michigan and the County of Washington.
Okay. Yeah. That Washtenaw County and the state of Michigan, so we just, does that sound good?
Any further discussion? All in favor of the resolution as amended?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next on the agenda, we have a solid waste programs update. Crescent Slotin from the city's public services area is here to update us on a variety of activities surrounding solid waste. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Chair Needham. Get set up here. There we go. Got there eventually. There we go. Okay. Yes, as Commissioner Needham mentioned, I'm Crescent Slotin. I know most of the commissioners, but I see a few new faces. I'm with the public services area and focused these days in solid waste, so I'm here to provide an update on our various multiple aspects of the solid waste program that I think is of interest to the commission and the public. So go through these items and what I plan to cover, really starting quite frankly, at the top level. There's been some action actually by the commission and council, state level items, and some things like to just pass along quick updates to the group on those. Update everyone on regionalization, another topic that's been ongoing. Fill you in on where that stands. Next, touch on the solid waste resources management plan that I'm leading, and again, the commission's been a part of that in several ways. Talk about services and contracts, an ongoing effort and topic that kind of ties into several of those items previously, so there's a connection to several of these. And then through staffing and how staffing is being handled around the solid waste program area, here with the city discussion of interest of the group, certainly of the organization, and we have things that are adjusting and moving within the organization in other areas, and so this is one of those, and update everyone on that. And then finish as a specific topic and just some financial items. Actually, something I really want to bring in just to kind of clarify for the body that we've been kind of talking around, but really I've realized really just need to give some specific things and just recycling in particular in the past, so try to add some clarity and context and actually background on that. So first, in terms of the state level items, the commission approved a resolution recommending that city council lobby and support a recycling funding initiative that is really started with the governor's office in terms of one of several items. The governor's looking to have improvements in the area of all kinds of infrastructure through the state, statewide level. And so City Council took that up in November and approved its resolution number 18466 as it's listed there, which the specific item and is Senate Bill 943, which the crux of it, the main piece of that is really around funding tied to landfill. And I don't want to, you folks talked about it, so I won't give too much added, maybe a bit for the project or for the audience, but it would result, if it were to pass through the process and become law, would increase the tip fees for landfills, and then that revenue would be used for various environmental aspects, including recycling, but also other things such as brownfields and such. So the status of that is it's still in committee. It has not been brought back to the House. We're in the wonderful lame duck session of the state legislature, Last check Tuesday, end of the day. I didn't get a chance to check again today to the state's website to see where it was. It was still listed as being in committee, but depending on who you talk to and who you hear, something may be coming out of the committee to come back. So we'll be monitoring that, keeping you folks updated if that actually does come to go through the process at the state level. As I was preparing material and thinking of other state level items, I actually caught on the local news something that I hadn't noticed otherwise. So another bill was recently introduced the end of November from the House, which would actually remove the longstanding 10-cent deposit that we've had in the state for beverage containers. As it was described in the news report that I heard, the support or the reasoning for that is that particularly aluminum, as the aluminum beverage containers, is actually a very high-priced commodity of the recycling stream. And by going through deposit, that's captured at the retailers, and the representative spoke to, and at least the reporter describing it, that by putting it into the recycling stream rather than back to your supermarket in the mire, then the recycling process and programs and contractors and municipalities could gain from the value of that. I don't know if I'm so sold on that, because all of a sudden you're taking it from a very clean process where it's only aluminum cans in the store versus now it's in a single stream, and we've got all kinds of things related to that. So we'll be monitoring that as well and keeping folks. And just one thing with that is if it, as it's written and proposed, it would sunset in 2023 is when that would take place. So there'd be some time for that, but that's out there. And then another state level item that I think the group may be aware of, but I just wanted to specifically note it. I think a lot of folks are familiar with the Michigan Recycling Coalition, statewide group. They have an annual conference every year in the spring in May, and this coming 2019 session is going to be here in town. It's going to be at the Sheridan down on Boardwalk. And so we have a city staff member, Christina Gomes, and Recycle Ann Arbor, Angela Porter, their outreach specialist, are on the planning committee for that. So we're engaged as part of that process here locally to help shape that program and schedule. Then dropping down below the state level to the broader region and regionalization, there's been a discussion and examination almost a year, really asking, and maybe even a little longer, is there effort, interest, momentum that can be gained building off of the county's recent solid waste master plan update, which recommended regional approaches to dealing with diversion, waste reduction, and so a group that is being facilitated and led by Washtenaw County coming out of that plan first asked the question, does this make sense? And the answer to that was, well, we think so, and it does. And so a group was formed. It was asked, okay, who is interested in participating to see if we can actually shape and pull together a regional authority around waste management and recycling. And we've listed on the slide there the 8 municipalities, jurisdictions that have been discussing this since June. Actually been a formal group that's been meeting, talking about what that group would look like, and really working around literally a set of articles of incorporation. Really, what is this thing gonna be, but set it up in a legal standing. And where that's at, it was anticipated, my first agenda item for this meeting was actually regionalization. That group thought we'd be at a point that we'd be coming to this body with information, a presentation, and the background on a regional authority, and asking the commission to act on a proposed resolution to support and recommend to City Council. We didn't get there time for this meeting, but at our last meeting, I believe it was last week, it's kind of flown by, but we think we are there. And so as a little primer, tentatively on pencil, your January meeting, I'm probably going to be back, but really the lead's going to be folks from the county really explaining and presenting the regional authority that would be proposed, and would then go on to City Council, presumably February, perhaps March. So that's where we're at that. And one aspect of that, as those that have heard this since it started, with the initial discussions of looking at regionalization, and even some of my write-ups probably included other parties, particularly institutions, University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Ann Arbor Public Schools. So you might be wondering, well, why aren't they on the list? The authority that's being formed and the enabling legislation is specific to municipalities. So they can't be actually on the board or a member. However, that doesn't preclude them from being literally customers of the authority. So if an authority is formed, not to give it all away and steal the thunder from the county folks when they come, but if this comes to be in some manner, they can contract and actually provide services to folks like the University of Michigan, Eastern Michigan. So they are still in play. For the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan, we've certainly involved the commission, had a work session with you folks here in August on that. And where we're at with it is about 3 weeks ago, middle of November there, November 14th, we held our first advisory committee meeting. 34 participants, been here my whole career, the largest advisory committee I've worked with. I had a staff member that walked by for another meeting in the DDA where we were, and she asked me how my public meeting went, and I said, oh no, that was my advisory committee, so that kind of surprised her. But the meeting went really well. Commissioner Mirsky and Brown participated as representatives for the group, so maybe at the end, if there's time, let them weigh in and add things, but certainly after the meeting, if there's specifics, they could answer questions too, as well as I. But key point with that, I've got it on the slide there, but we do have a project page, just the city webpage, a2gov.org/SWRMP. I tried to get a better acronym, but I couldn't, so it doesn't pronounce well. But on their project page down at the bottom, there are links to the materials for the project, but includes multiple items for that meeting. So we did have CTN video it, so you can see the whole video and actually experience it. Meeting summary, PowerPoint, so those materials are there for review by anyone of interest. And then looking ahead, the second meeting will be held on January 15th. Again, these meetings, we're holding them in the DDA conference room. It's a nice space for a group that large, good meeting area. And again, from 1 to 3. And the timing of the meetings, they're on about every other month. So we're scheduled for 4 meetings at this point, with meeting 3 on March 12th and meeting 4 on May 14th, excuse me. And also as a reminder that the team and the project will be coming back to this body at 2 set times. So after the 3rd meeting of the advisory committee, where at that point, that group and the project will be forming its draft recommendations, have an understanding of the resource needs and the implementation, so we can bring that back to this body for you folks as a whole, along with, after already having your representatives on the committee, but this would be the whole commission to engage in that discussion and react to those things so that they can really form the draft recommendations, which would be the 4th meeting of the committee. And then after that, we would again be coming back to the commission to further refine and hone into the final recommendation and the plan document. So with that, as to what's coming up and what's next, outside of just the advisory committee meetings themselves, the consultant team is wrapping up their financial cost of service analysis. That's going to come into us. Staff is going to review that and make sure that it's all set, and that will be used in that next committee meeting, and certainly with discussions with the group. I know a lot of folks interested in, a lot of interest in the solid waste fund, so that's a key piece to this. Also performing a benchmark analysis, and that had some talk and some feedback actually from the advisory committee, some good ideas on other communities and even city county situations similar to ours with Washtenaw County to look at. So that's being done, and we'll have those results. Be working on the draft questionnaire for the scientific phone survey to, once we have those initial thoughts on recommendations and some costs, to be able to go out to the public in that survey to get reaction to those, what are people's reactions to those, and then costing out what, again, those options, those programs, and steps to implement. And then another piece that I'm going to be moving into that actually was a part of the contract with our consultant, Aptum, as far as procurement for contracts, which are expiring at the end of this fiscal year, June 30th, 2019. And so that actually leads me into the next section of services and contracts. And so since this is something that we're working on, it's a pertinent topic to update the commission. So I've explained to the body and the community multiple times and in different ways our delivery of services. My note I've got burned in my head, we have currently 11 different contracts with different aspects of our solid waste program of various types of services done by 7 different contractors, along with city staff doing things. Christina Siebert, a project manager from Aptum, did a great job, better than I ever have, of showing the picture. So I robbed this from her presentation with her permission. And so as it really is shown, just a quick run through it, really for the public folks at home. In the single-family residential areas, fairly straightforward. People take out their trash carts. The city comes along with our crews and our trucks, tips that cart, and takes that trash to our transfer facility. See if I can do this with the mouse. Oh, since my laser pointer doesn't work. So they collect the trash. It goes to our transfer station, where it's put in larger trucks and then taken to the landfill. That is operated by Advanced Disposal, who is our contract operator. On the recycling end, the blue cart goes out to the curb by the residents. That is collected by Recycle Ann Arbor. That material goes to our MRF, where Recycle Ann Arbor and their processing partner, Rumpke, take the material. It's, again, put in larger trucks at our MRF, and it's taken down to Rumpke facility in Cincinnati. And then compost, a seasonal program here in the city, is collected by the city and is taken to our compost facility, but that is operated by We Care Denali. So that's pretty clean, fairly straightforward, but as you can see, a couple of different folks involved there. So if you've got a question, if somebody has a cart that's tipped or whatever, it's actually important to know which cart, which item, because we have to figure out, okay, who's got to deal with it. As you move to multifamily residential, well, depending on which site you're at and perhaps even where it's located, it could be that the city's picking up the trash, depending on if you've got carts or if you got dumpsters. We do some of those. But if you have a dumpster, you may also have waste management through our franchise, commercial franchise contract, collecting it as well. Recycling, actually very similar. If you're in a multifamily development, if you've got carts, Recycle Ann Arbor has the trucks that pick up the carts. But if you have a dumpster, the city is the one that's picking up the recycling out of the dumpsters. So again, if you've got an issue or a problem, we can't tell automatically. And then compost, actually, there's maybe 1 or 2, but really is not offered to the multifamily sites. And then businesses, institutions, so the public schools, by institutions, that does not include the university. Quick point caveat on that, because they have their own collection system. But the public schools as an institution, a big one. So again, trash could be picked up by us, could be picked up by waste management and recycling. Actually could be, again, picked up by Recycle Ann Arbor, or could be by the city, and particularly by the city in carts if you're in the downtown. So if you're in a multifamily, and if you're in a multifamily in the downtown, it's kind of confusing who all's doing what. So one of the aspects of the program and even the project with Aptum and the specific task in terms of developing a request for proposal is to consolidate this, simplify it, which we feel is going to enhance and improve our service delivery and deliver those services to the community. So what this slide, what the boxes highlights, is the contracts. We have 3 different contracts covered in those items that I just described. We have the recycling collection by Recycle Ann Arbor, So that cuts across here. We've got the waste franchise with waste management, cuts across here, and the interim MRF operations contract with Recycle Ann Arbor and Rumpke that are all set to sunset on July 30th of 2019. And so the task and the approach with building a task into the contract with Optum to help us develop a scope of work to replace those. Now, moving into then that next piece, in addition, City Council in May passed a resolution, I've noted there, that indicated that the city is still going to collect the material. We're in the business collecting the trash, and though we might have looked at it through the project with Optum to, do we open the box and look at everything fresh, but we got the direction, we've heard it, that the staff at the city that collects trash that's in this program area is going to stay in this program area. We're still going to be doing it. We're maintaining those staff levels. But a key thing here is that we realize, too, there's opportunity to still improve our service delivery, still keeping that staff and providing services. But keeping that in mind with still looking to improve that delivery of service, what we're looking at is developing an RFP, or request for proposals, to solicit contractors to come and do our trash dumpster service, so what Waste Management's doing, but also those other select, really they're historic, if you will, dumpsters in the schools and some multifamily that are basically older sites that we get dumpsters. The recyclable collections, that's already done by Recycle Ann Arbor. And then again, the few select sites, we do some dumpsters where dumpsters are placed instead of carts. But then also a key piece and another aspect that I've been dealing with in this program area is the downtown. And the matter that we've got the city trucks, which are really built for more of the suburban areas and the neighborhoods, trying to squeeze into the alleys and deal with carts. So trying to get all of those collections under this contract. And then also the processing the recyclables, that we've got that contract that's expiring to operate the MRF, well, by bundling the collection of the recyclables with then the processing, that processing contractor knows that volume that they're going to be getting, that's that known quantity, and then also with the trash collection as well. That's another, again, from the economic model, and we talked about it with the House bill, but there's basically the economics of building that into a singular contract, and again, the consolidation of the services. And the other aspects of the RFP that we're outlining and looking to do is include that for the processing of the recyclables, our facility is still there, available, it's functioning as a transfer facility now. That's the base level. And so we're not expecting, not wanting anyone to come in, collect recyclables, and then just take them directly off to wherever, Lansing or somewhere else, that we still want to collect to at least consolidate and do that more efficiently, reduce the greenhouse gas effect of the trucking. But also include that if someone wanted to, we weren't going to require, but if they wanted to make a proposal and basically have a plan to reinvigorate, if you will, reutilize our MRF, the facilities there, basically I put out the blank sheet of paper, give us your ideas, and we would consider it. So that wouldn't be a requirement of the proposal, but again, this is an opportunity for us to see what's out there in terms of the market and the interest that folks may generate with that. And then I touched on it quickly, but the specific piece that with the downtown area, the downtown is really, and folks have seen articles in M Live, they didn't have my picture, but they've had my name a few times, and just service delivery in the downtown has been a very key topic for the folks in the downtown, the merchants, the businesses themselves, that we would consolidate that service, but realizing and recognizing that's an animal in and of itself, that we would work to define that separately, have separate pricing, and really look at that as its whole. And really, to the second slide, a key piece of this to jump down is increasing the level of service, particularly in the downtown. We've heard from the merchants that there is a desire, even a need, and a willingness to pay for expanded service levels, 7 days a week. And it was even floated out 2 times a day on Saturday and Sunday, 7 days a week, which is going to come at a cost, but they've indicated, at least initially, yep, we're willing to pay for it because we see the need, we see the benefit. But we've got to find out what those costs are. So other aspects that would be included in the contracts, again, some things that we looked at in terms of performance, outcome-based, dealing with the customer service issues, the service delivery. The equipment mentioned, right sizing it so the downtown can be serviced most efficiently and effectively, that they're not trying to put in large trucks into the downtown. And recognizing that we've got the Solid Waste Authority, as I've already touched on, and there's also a potential, I've been made aware that the merchants themselves are actually trying to look at a way to, in essence, take over the solid waste in the downtown, which is another topic and would include ordinance change and things like that. But there's interest there. That's certainly going to be made aware in the RFP, so flexibility is going to be a key item within that RFP proposal. So our timeline that we're working on, I actually should have probably had the RFP out already to meet a true preferred timeline, because if someone's going to come in, they're going to need to literally gear up equipment, trucks to do this, but we are where we are, so I'm going to be pushing to get the RFP out in December. I know there's something on the agenda around this topic, but just informing what my direction is and where I'm heading. To get that out in December, which would lead to proposals coming in, if I get it out real soon, late January, more likely early February, and then selection in the March timeframe, so that, again, that can get put into place so that those contractors can gear up and get that equipment purchased, which does have quite a lead time. And I'm sure there's questions, but I've got my questions and answers slide at the end, so we're getting close. So staffing. Actually, let me even start and introduce that. I know there's been discussions, thoughts. I'm not aware necessarily among the commission as a whole, but I know Missy, even when she came in, she had, I think, solid waste listed in the duties and job descriptions, which certainly there's a relation there. But the question is, where does solid waste land? Who really owns it? One of the kind of downsides of where we've gotten and went to as a lean organization, things were in different spots, systems planning where I was manager, public works, touched on areas of sustainability. But with the decision that the city is going to stay in the business of collecting and have staff and equipment doing it, I don't think Missy's jumping up and down of having to deal with trucks and breakdowns and customer complaints and the AFSCME and the unions, and trying to fit that in with literally the public works unit. So solid waste is housed in public works. There wasn't necessarily a big rollout and announcement, but I call it a soft launch. But right now, the solid waste function of the city is under the purview of Molly Maciejewski, who works for Craig Hubie. So ultimately, it's still Craig as it basically was, but really more clearly pulled together under Public Works, because it is an operational need. And as I mentioned, there's been other things, the organization's shifting and adjusting a little bit. Another similar approach, transportation. Not to bore too much, but we had transportation, we had people in systems planning, I had Eli Cooper, we had the signs and signal folks in Public Works, and we had the transportation engineers in engineering, and there were found to be some difficulties with that, so that group got consolidated, in that case, in engineering. So this is a similar model to that, so I give that just by way of comparison. But also, to be clear, just like most other operations and services in the city, it doesn't mean everything's in Public Works. There's other needs and things, supportive roles that are still needed. And so I've just got those listed there with the fleet unit, fleet and facilities, but break out their two roles. We're going to be in the business of collections. We're still going to need trucks doing those collections, so they're going to have to support that. The facilities that we already own, the MRF building, the transfer station and compost, so facilities has got to support that. Customer service, dealing with the accounts and being the initial point of contact for A2 Fix-It and everything for all of those services, and so they're still definitely involved in the communications office with messaging and delivery, and certainly sustainability and innovations. Missy can't get off scot-free. She's still gonna be along. So at the next slide, and I apologize for the small font print, but it also illustrates just what is involved in the area of solid waste. So I do want to point out and emphasize, and it's in the title, the title staffing, but these are organizational roles. Please do not view a box as a person. There isn't one person doing this, or that this thing is only one person's. And even for myself, sorry, my eyes have gotten really bad. And I won't necessarily go through all of those things, but it's a broad area. It's a core service that the city provides that we're responsible for, whether it's our crews or contracted services. But in addition, as you folks know, as people involved, education and outreach in many ways, both broadly in terms of programming, in terms of engaging with customers directly that are having problems with their behavior. Something we've heard in our stakeholder sessions with the management plan, enforcement. Particularly in the downtown, they said, we want enforcement. We want you to use a stick. So they feel that we're not doing that enough or well enough. There's lots of, we were in the business, folks don't know, we have a landfill that is now ours to carry. And there's things that go along with that. So we have to do monitoring. We have some compliance issues with the MDQ permitting, all those things. So that falls into this, as well as working with Missy's group on metrics, measures, but also policy direction, monitoring the state bills on things as I started. And so this is meant to represent those things that cover that area, but they will be, those blue boxes are meant to show that those will be housed, the responsibility of Public Works, and with the other boxes representing those units that are supporting those various aspects of the program area. But to staffing itself, too, that the management plan and the Aptum team actually, after the stakeholder sessions, and in particular with the Environmental Commission, they came to me and they had their follow-up stakeholder sessions actually were with Craig Hupy, my boss, and Howard, everybody's boss. And they asked me, can we ask them if we can include staffing? Because they heard it from you folks particularly, but also through other stakeholders, just this part of organization, but even what is the appropriate staffing level? And they got the okay that, yes, that's something to look at in this mix. So they're going to be evaluating that and coming back with some recommendations. But we still got the day-to-day. We still got to pick it up at the curb. We still got to put it in the right place. We still got to answer the concerns and the service issues that we have out in the field. So that will be coming, and that's in the mix. But to fill you in on some other things, hearing the feedback on compliance, I have been told, a bit secondhand, but very reliable source, I'd say, and strong enough to put in the PowerPoint, that included in the upcoming budget discussions will be a position for solid waste compliance. Right now, we do have compliance. It's handled by Community Standards. That's a group, it's an arm of the police department, and so they're definitely deputized, authorized to issue tickets, citations, but they're dealing with parking, they're dealing with the whole gamut. And so it's complaint-based. If we put in a call, yep, they're gonna get to it, but they're gonna get to it in basically order of priority. The idea with this is it's a person specifically focused on solid waste. Now, we'll have to see, and part of that evaluation is going to be, okay, is there a need for full-time, 100% solid waste, funded solid waste, or we do more? Is that still in Community Standards? Is it Public Works, who really doesn't issue tickets and doesn't have badges? But so that's got to get figured out. But the need for compliance and a focus on it has been pointed out, and so I've anticipated and I've been told that will be part of the budget deliberations coming up. Then another piece, the manager role, the oversight. And again, kind of going back, and I see Missy nodding. There was maybe an initial thought that Missy might be innovations and sustainability and solid waste manager, or something like that. But again, we're in that operational public works model, but there is a need. That area, that breadth of area needs someone's focus overall to lead that. Well, down at Public Works, I call it Molly's shop. Molly's the manager. She is responsible for 6 work units in that area. So the solid waste, and I've been talking about streets, so the street plowing, potholes, 3 utility groups, water, sanitary, and storm, and forestry. Is that 6? Used to be parks, but again, with some of the reorganization, parks is now back under the Parks Department, parks maintenance. So she has a very broad reach. She's one manager. She had 2 assistant managers that were able to kind of divide and oversee the crews, the crew supervisors. She lost one of those staff to retirement this summer. So she now has her and 1 assistant covering all 6 items. So there's a vacancy, an opening, but again, here we have an opportunity to really shape what are the needs in this area, what are the needs in Public Works, and shape and get that position crafted to focus on this critical and important area and support, though, the needs that she has down at Public Works. So another aspect with my little bullet there, as far as there's still some things that still have to be cleared up. Is there going to be this authority? We're going to be coming back again soon. That can have certainly an effect. Could be an authority, maybe something that could be a great time saver and resource saver if that becomes a body that can take some things on that maybe we can contract with. Certainly, and again, I don't want to get too much ahead of the county and steal their thunder, but education and outreach at a broad regional level. Maybe that's something we can have them do, and so we can focus on some of the other core services. So as that becomes clear, that's going to help shape the role here for the group, but also this person and the need there. Not that I like to see my name in print, but fill everybody in and everything too, that I've been kind of plugging that gap. Since July 1, actually, I've been focused on solid waste, so I am the manager of the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan. I'm that lead. These other things that I've listed here, the procurement that I talked about on the contracted services, working on the regionalization, and I guess first time probably publicly, I'm going to be doing that for about the next year. And then after 33 years, beginning of 2020, it's going to be somebody else's. So I'm going to be actually retiring and heading out. So I am a card-carrying member of AARP, but yeah, feels weird saying it publicly for the first time. It's getting out, so I figured I might as well do it. But I'm kind of filling that gap, if you will, as that's why I introduced myself too as public services. I don't call myself the solid waste manager, but in an informal way, that's what I'm trying to fill along with Molly and then her existing assistant as best we can. But really with the goal there at the bottom, that is one of my tasks will be working at what is this role, what's that need, so that we can get that filled with that position as I transition out. And then I believe my last item, area to talk about, so financial items. And I forgot to mention at the beginning for the audience at home, you folks have seen it as a companion item to the PowerPoint. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. I've got a much more detailed written memo that fairly well paralleled the presentation with that. And so there's some more financial items and details in there, some questions that had been asked earlier that we try to answer. But I've realized an item that I've kind of talked around, but really wanted to spend just a little time to really kind of clarify for folks around recycling, and from a budgetary, a financial piece, and the cost of recycling, because as one piece of it, an attachment to my memo was an October memo that Craig Hupy, our service area administrator, addressed to Commissioner Mursky, and it was shared with the commission, really around finances. But a question we heard has been around the cost of recycling, and especially as you look back, and the cost of recycling. So I just really wanted to just set the context, if you will, for recycling here in Ann Arbor, and the issue of cost. And for those that were part, just as a quick reminder too, those that participated in a session we called Recycling 101 back at the beginning of the year with Kelly Rooney of Advanced Disposal, one of the contractors that I mentioned that works for us. She did a great job, I felt, of a session really explaining recycling, but from an operator standpoint. And I went back to her slides today. I didn't see it explicitly in there, but I know she has said it, and I've heard it multiple times in conferences I've been at and different things and reading. One of the big things is back to the earlier approach for our contract, but really, this wasn't unique to Ann Arbor. The view or the thought early on was, well, recycling is great. It's a commodity. It's got value. We're going to be able to sell this stuff. This is going to be, at best, this could be a moneymaker. This could be net positive, and at worst, it'll cover costs. And so great, as well as save money by keeping it out of the landfill, and as well as all the environmental reasons. Well, as we talked, and I'm sure your earlier discussions around the state bill and our low tipping fee, as well as the fact that recycling it costs to recycle, I guess is the point, that view, and I've heard, and Kelly has told me, and even different conversations, the industry, speaking for the industry, did itself actually a disfavor by kind of touting the economic benefit too hard that this can pay for itself, because there are costs that come with it. And so if we were to look back, and I've just framed a couple of key points of our earlier recycling contract approach, and this was early on, and it's been said and heard it, and I realize it, we were leaders. We want to be leaders again back, but sometimes when you're leaders, you're out in front and you learn some things that, maybe if you were a little lagger, you might learn from other things like not counting on the economics of recycling. And so our first contract that we had with Resource Recovery Systems was the final contract name. They went through different namings and mergers, but a big thing again was counting on the commodity value as a key piece of the contract. And as part of that too, one, to fully utilize our facility, but again, really generate that revenue, as well as economic or the benefits of added recycling. Our contract structure really incentivized third-party material, so material outside of the community of Ann Arbor. So it encouraged RS to go out and work with other communities, private haulers, other entities to bring material into our facility. And the contract was written that we'd get a little slice of that commodity value. They're using our facility, we'll get a cut of that. And another key aspect to the structure and the approach, and it's been a topic around our MRF facility. It's our facility, it's our equipment, but yet they were using the equipment. They were using the equipment to process our material, but again, through that structure of third party, well, you're using it, you got to, it's going to wear, it needs to be replaced. So, and that's a much more complicated, I'm really painting a high level, but it added complexity to it, and the funding for that replacement was kind of done separately. It wasn't, if you will, baked into the cost of processing. So kind of set that aside. Those are some key points of the approach that we worked under with Community, which really was fine when markets were good, when the equipment was in good shape, and things were able to be maintained. But as things went on and volumes increased and markets went bad, then things kind of changed around. So what that hindsight tells us is, and I think everybody now gets it, but I just need to say it, is we can't be in recycling with any thought of the economic benefit. I mean, yes, that's an output. That's certainly a part we need to be cognizant of. We got to look for that. It's an impact to how it's done, but we got to be doing it because it needs to be done. It's the right way to do it. You folks are the ones to tell us all that and emphasize that, but that's really it. And to recognize it costs. It's going to come with a cost. Also, that matter of third-party volume tonnage and this really goes back, and Kelly Rennie can do it much better than me, but there's that sweet spot. When you've got a facility that processes recyclables, it's going to be of a certain size with equipment and staffing to a certain level that you've got to have enough volume to keep that equipment running, to staff those people fully, that you're not, 4-hour shifts, 8-hour shifts, but yet you also can't overwhelm the facility. You've got to be able to shut the equipment down. You've got to be able to have shutdowns for repair, for maintenance, for just regular cleaning. I mean, some of the facilities, and quite frankly, I believe it's the Rumpke facility in Cincinnati, I've been down there a few times now, it's Recycle Ann Arbor. They actually have a separate shift daily that after they're done, they go in and they clean the whole facility. That is part of their nature, that's part of their operation, and that's part of their pricing factor, if you will. And so that's kind of key and where I'm going. That care, maintenance, rehabilitation, and replacement, that can't be an afterthought. It's got to be baked into what you're paying, but also what you're doing. And as I've put there, again, hindsight 2020, as we modified our facility, put things in, we actually made it even less able to be maintained. And it just got so tight in there, you really couldn't, we shoehorned some stuff in. And so when you put too much in a facility that's tough to maintain, it gets to where we're at. So to try to express that and really kind of get at that cost piece, if you will, that was really the intention for this slide. And again, this is in my memo, and so a little more detail with that. But it was really meant to illustrate, and we actually have kind of a good situation, if you will, to look at those different approaches. That what you see in the chart here, FY16 was the last year where RRS, under that former structure, if you will, of contract, was operating. So if you look at it from financially, you can say the blue column there, the blue bar, is the processing cost, or what we were charged for them to actually process. But again, that didn't include funding for the replacement, the maintenance of the equipment. That was off in another way, calculated differently, and so that's not baked in or factored into that. That was just tipping it on the floor and paying somebody to do it, in essence, to, again, oversimplify. Another key piece is the orange bar there, and it looks like, a bar above. Well, that's a credit. So the fact that it's above the zero line, that's not good. That's why under the next two sets, Waste Management, who operated the MRF for us on an interim emergency basis in FY17, and the last full fiscal year with Recycle Ann Arbor, those are below zero. That means we were getting credits, we were getting reductions for the commodity. And even though in my report and hearing of the markets and paper being bad, we were still getting positives for that. But yet, in that earlier contract, because of its structure, its complexity, and its tie to the third party, we actually were paying them more because of just the complexity of the contract. So it actually bumped up the cost back then. And I hope I'm not glazing everybody's eyes over and getting too much, but this is, I think, the piece that's kind of been missing from some of the discussion. And so move over to FY17. As I mentioned, Waste Management was the first operator emergency basis when we severed ties with RRS, kept the process going, but they came in, and then Recycle Ann Arbor similarly, in that model that Kelly Rooney talks about, where the contract gets set up, you have a price from the processor, the contractor, where they have their staff, but also their repair and replacement for costs built in, maintenance of the equipment, all those things into a single item, and it's all built into it, and it's a cost per ton in this case, and you pay that. The more you do, the more wear on the machine, the more people, hours it's going to take for that share of it, that's baked into it. Much more straightforward, but it's in my opinion, a much more truer representation of that's what the full cost is for recycling. And so again, you see pretty comparative between Waste Management and Recycle Ann Arbor with that new model. And so and I'm pretty sure this is my last slide before wrap, is to tie and bring it back to the MRF. Again, things you folks all know, folks have been telling me, I definitely know it, that since our MRF literally went down in terms of a processing facility, it's left a hole in this region, and there's a lack. That's why our contract as it is today, our material ends up in Cincinnati. You're not happy about it, I'm not happy about it. It's getting recycled, but it needs to get fixed, and there's a need in the area. The reality is, to restart it, it's going to take a significant capital investment. Don't know what that investment is. I'm not in the business to truly do that, and smart enough to know that other people need to do it, but that's also, again, to tie back to the approach we're looking to take as of this point with the RFP is if somebody's out there that wants to put pen to paper and look at things more broadly and taking into account, we do have this authority that's perhaps going to come together that may have that sweet spot of volume that could be done. We'll see where that happens. But with that going forward, key things to keep in mind, as we mentioned, we've got to right-size it, but recognize we've got to do it because it has to be done. It's the right thing to do, environmentally, sustainability, but it does come at a cost. And so with that, probably not too many questions, but if there are any, I'm at the end.
Well, thanks, Crescent. I know it's a very complicated subject with and you're juggling a lot of balls here. But I think, I came into this situation late, so I don't know if my knowledge is complete enough. So I want you to take anything I have to say just with a grain of salt, and I appreciate any pushback you might have.
Mm-hmm.
So, first thing is that, with the, for example, with this chart on the realized unit costs for Ann Arbor recyclables processing, I believe that most of that extra cost from, say, $32 a ton to $131 a ton, then the next year accounts for the transportation of recycling to Cincinnati.
Well, and
so, right. So, and this is a situation that's been going on for 2.5 years. So I'm wondering how the city staff has responded to that, because it's a predictable nosebleed, and it is eroding the solid waste fund significantly. So I don't know what plans were discussed about trying to reduce that cost, and what the opportunities might have been. But I would just like some explanation of that.
Well, actually, the opportunity, in my opinion, is actually here with the consolidated RFP that we're looking to do to get somebody looking at the collections, those contracted services as a whole, and the opportunity potentially of a regional group of municipalities. Again, a key to that facility is having the volume to operate it appropriately. Enough, but also not overwhelm it.
Right. So, see, the thing that startled me is at this advisory committee meeting that was held on November 14th, one of the 4 major questions that was talked about was consolidating everything into one contract. And that startled me, and I think it startled 90% of the people that I polled at that meeting. So as a major kind of consideration or topic for discussion, that seemed a little unbalanced.
Yeah.
Because it all comes out in the numbers, and it made me think again about what kind of financial model you might be using. in constructing these RFPs, in order so that you can properly predict or trade off what the costs and benefits might be of different scenarios. So I don't know what kind of software you're using right now or what kind of process you're using, but because you know, that's a key thing. And then the other comment I will make is just that the reason why I drafted this resolution about suspending an RFP is that because all these balls are in play, and they will be in play for at least a year. Now, for example, the Regionalization Authority won't be probably ready to do any business until July 1st, realistically. I mean, you have a better idea than I do of the pace of change in government institutions, but I'm thinking that July 1st is probably going to be the time when people can actually really talk about things and draft a workable plan. So at this point, to be drafting an RFP for long-term contracts, it seems a little risky. It seems risky. And I don't know if you've considered just doing contract extensions until you reach that point. And on the other hand, it makes me feel like I wonder why there wasn't a more active, or apparently a more active effort to try to reduce the cost of transporting all these recyclables to Cincinnati, rather than trying to find some perhaps cheaper alternative. I mean, I don't really know what you've done to shave that off, but if you look at the numbers, it doesn't seem to have really changed, you know, over the last 2.5 years.
Well, that's a result of a contractual relationship in that the contract sets the pricing, and that's...
But these things can be renegotiated usually. Have you had any pushback about that? Or?
We don't really, when we enter in a contract for a term and at a price, that's not a, and quite frankly, it may be into a legal question too in terms of that ability. But from my experience, we went out, looked for that, and yeah, there was I can get you up to speed on the background and the history of that process that got us there, because there was a slightly smaller, cheaper option, but this was the selection that was made, and that's where we're.
Well, I can sympathize with that. Yeah, we all get handed things that we don't, we didn't start, but we have to finish. So in terms of like, and I appreciate the need for simplification. But, you know, I just want to make sure that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. That
I guess
simplification is good, but really, you know, reducing costs and maximizing whatever recycling revenue you might expect is the goal.
Yep.
And
actually, that's the recommendation from Aptum, and the thought behind even consolidating, as well as going out with RFP, is to see what is the market for the costs. Because in looking back, it's been a long time. The contracts that are expiring are very long-standing contracts, so we can speculate, and Aptum can give their estimates of what they think it'll be, but this is also an opportunity to see what the market bears when what those prices would be for those services. You know, whenever we go out with it, that's the opportunity to get the pricing together from the marketplace as to what those costs actually are.
Okay, the costs for collection or recycling?
Yes.
Processing? Or
yes.
All of those?
Well, yes.
Okay.
If we put it, and again, the idea of the packaging, it's all there as all together with the pricing for all that.
Okay.
Outside of what the city's going to do, because again, the city's still going to be involved, but those other outside services.
Okay. I mean, I have a whole list of questions, but I don't want to monopolize the discussion.
I'll leave that to the chair.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll keep going then. So, you know, looking at these charts and everything, it's pretty hard to come to a judgment about an independent judgment. And so I think it would be a lot better for me if I could get like a spreadsheet, if I could see a spreadsheet, like a meaningful spreadsheet that has all the breakdowns, according to
Okay.
how the contracts are written and everything.
Okay.
So,
So, yep, if you
I
can,
would encourage you to share spreadsheets with
Okay.
people, because I think most of us here know how to work with spreadsheets. And, you
That's
know,
what we're
there's a
used to
fair
doing.
amount of expertise in the room here on the commission. So, and we could help both staff and council go through the different scenarios and things like that, because staff time's limited and council time even more.
Yep,
So
I
I
could
would
work with Missy to, I almost called you Emily. Missy, because I think what I would want to do, and we could certainly arrange it, I'd like to kind of walk folks through it, because again, there's some complexity to it, and, but yep, that's the tool I've been using to literally generate these things, so I think explanation goes along with it, so I can work with Missy to get something set up.
Can I chime in on that point briefly? My sense is that accounting for solid waste by activity, meaning recycling. These are all the costs, these are all the revenues for recycling. Trash, these are all the costs, these are all the revenues for trash. Same thing for compost. And then maybe there's a separate category for education, outreach, things like that. That would make things a lot more transparent for all of us. I mean, some of the material that you've provided for tonight is really helpful, but in a sense, it still, for me, isn't completely understandable. You can't see tonnages. You don't know what the breakdown is. Some things are going to be overhead costs. Those would have to be allocated. But I think for each one of us, we would understand this a lot better. And admittedly, I'll say here, I've misunderstood some of the past accounting information that you've provided to us, and I've passed on information to others that's been wrong. I mean, I'll admit that. But I think all of us would be in a much better position to understand it. I understand, on the other hand, you know, the more transparency you have here, then the more questions you're going to get, because you supply more information. It's confusing. I mean, I'll admit to that too. You just dig and dig and dig. But the way it is right now, I mean, you provided, you know, this breakdown. I mean, this is the version that you have right now. It's more detailed, but there's all kinds of costs that are not aligned with an activity. And I think that would really help a lot. Piggybacking on what Steve said, if I see a spreadsheet, I want to see a spreadsheet by activity, and not where a line item is, you know, part of one line item is trash and recycling, maybe another line item is 3 or 4 activities. You can't align then a cost or a revenue item with the overarching activity.
Actually, that's very helpful for me, John, because where I go with that, that is what I am fully expecting from the financial analysis and model from Aptum.
Exactly.
And I was pushing for them to have it to me for tonight to be able to share. And talking with Phil Kowalski, the principal, that's one of his main tasks, he told me he understood and he apologized, but he said it's got to be right. That he's still resolving, but what it's coming back with is just that.
Perfect.
So through this service area. So if we try to sit down now, what it literally is, I'm working off the city's financial system, which is the accounting, bookkeeping, ledgers. My dad was an accountant, but I did not stay at a Holiday Inn Express that night, so I'm not even going to try. But I try my best, but that's what we end up with, is pulling from my financial system, trying to put it into Excel, and yeah, it's an understanding, and also just generally speaking, municipal accounting. I picked it up by osmosis, but it's taken me 30 years, and I'm still not good at it. So to try to, you know, again, John hit this point really well, we try, you know, we're certainly looking to be transparent, but as you get into it, one thing as an answer, it leads to other things that, well, there is the reason or the answer, but then it begets more. So I guess hearing that, and that was actually very helpful, John, that I guess I would offer or suggest or ask that once we get the financial analysis and the model in from Aptum and have our staff, you know, Marty Bershon, the right people digging into it, making sure, yes, this is it, this matches, and it's telling that story, that information that can be understandable as we're talking about, which is, again, my expectation. I have to see what we get. I'm fully expecting it, though, to be that. So I think that's where we'll be at, and really that's the target for the January advisory committee meeting. So that's my push, and I pushed to Phil that we need to have it so we can get it ready and be good with it, so that then that group can have it. So if whomever from the commission is going to be there, you guys might have to fight Ellison to see which one. But
Okay.
certainly, you all can be there.
Okay,
see that.
so, I mean, it's just, I'm having trouble with this because you're talking about targeting to issue RFPs in December, but we're going to have this meeting in January. So it's not clear to me how this is all going to mesh together.
Well,
you know what I mean? It
yep,
seems like
and-
you're trying
Well,
to.
and actually, again, Stephen, not to bore the commission too much detail, but another piece of this, and you've even mentioned it, governmental process. For me to issue an RFP, have vendors, and especially of this, what we're talking about doing, they're going to need time to review it, ask questions, put their proposal together. There's going to be a process to
Right.
review proposals, to interview, to select, make recommendation. We're talking almost,
Well,
and the schedule I laid out is a crashed schedule.
Well,
And so,
Well, sure. I mean, we haven't really talked about what the scope of these RFPs are. But, I mean, to me, this is just a stronger argument for just doing contract extensions for perhaps another year, 6 months to a year.
well,
Just until the whole process is finalized.
Yep.
You can construct a proper RFP, you know, identifying the key points.
Yep.
Or and the relatively minor points, and then,
Yep.
and then
So-
have a more judicious process.
yeah. So, and I guess my point, or my either response or really more information, because I think actually I missed something back to the slide that just occurred to me, but one, you folks are an advising group, and you've got something on the agenda you're going to pick up and probably talk, and I can certainly weigh in and add to that more specifically later. But, you know, as a staff person, I've got 3 contracts that I'm part of the team responsible for it, that are expiring. And I know to replace those, it takes time and a process to do it, and I'm engaged to do that. And I have a task with a contractor, a consultant, to help me do that. So we're just doing our job, I guess, if you will, so to speak. You folks can certainly advise council, and council can tell us, nope, put off, we're going to do something else, and that's totally appropriate. But, you know, I'm just kind of doing my marching orders. But because I think I did breeze through it, and maybe even totally missed it. It was in the slide, and actually, John pointed out a question I had on the slide and in the memo about, I mentioned, if we, since we are in the business, going to be in the business of collecting solid waste, so we've got staff, we've got trucks. And back to my slide of the service delivery. So those areas where we've got city with the dumpsters, though we've been told, and staff administrator's opinion, the spirit of the resolution, we're not cutting staff, we're not privatizing that function. Those people are not going to lose their jobs, or we're going to have those people. But this is, I did mention, I think, an opportunity for still flexibility in adapting our service delivery, but I think I forgot to mention what that was. That we would remove those staff that handle the front load, the dumpsters, whether it's recycling or trash. So by packaging this and putting that all into a contract, those staff that are doing the dumpsters, that then allows us to repurpose those staff to year-round residential compost, which I know has been desired by everybody forever. And so this, again, is just an opportunity that we have, and that's clicked as we've looked at this. So that's another just piece of the puzzle. But in order to go there, we've got to be able to pull them out of the roles that they're doing now, which would have to be through the new contract. So again, that could come later. We can move that down
So that's
another time.
year-round composting is contingent on
Yeah.
the completion of the RFP process and new contract.
Because
It wouldn't happen before that.
when it's been asked, and the issue we've had, and again, it's back to funding, staffing levels, our compost program is a seasonal, and so it's staffed by seasonal employees, temporaries. To go to year-round, you need regular employees, the full-time staff. Well, here we have that opportunity to literally shift them. They're still solid waste, they're still collections. We're reassigning. We've got the trucks. it could be done with that. But if we extend the contracts, that's fine, but everything stays status quo, but that also includes the seasonal compost for residential.
Crescent, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
You know, going back to the question that we've been asking you for a long time, which is how much is it going to cost to make the MRF operational? It seems to me we are now, you know, 2.5 years into this process, and our answer is whatever somebody tells us it's going to cost in the proposal that they submit. I think we are all kind of anxious and filled with dread about that conversation, for sure. But at the same time, if we're talking about a regional authority that might have a role in the governance and the oversight of this, it seems amazingly premature for us to enter into an agreement. I can't reconcile that. I mean, maybe help me think through it. I think the points that Stephen's bringing up are really valid simply because we have a lot of moving parts here, and unless we have an out clause or a buyout or something.
Or an expand clause.
Right.
Hey, we've got a contract, and oh, there's this other entity right nearby.
I mean,
So, yeah.
we're
that is-
relying on you all that are negotiating the larger regional agreement to understand what the dynamics are at play, but it's, you know, certainly conceivable that we would enter into a contract with somebody that is not desirable by some of our major partners, and I would not want that to, you know, end those discussions. I mean, so, you know, outside of really wanting to understand what the cost of operating that facility again are going to be, you know, I'm concerned about taking a premature step and perhaps, you know, sucking the oxygen out of that regional partnership discussion.
I agree with all that, too, you know, and in addition to that, I would say that I still think that the interim period that we're talking about before this regionalization gets up to speed, like, I'm really unclear on whether the MRF is operational. And we've been told that it is, that it isn't, that nothing is salvageable, that parts of it are salvageable. Right now, I don't know what's possible to do with the MRF. And as Steve said, we are bleeding money out of the fund by driving to Cincinnati. And is there a way to stop that for the short term while we wait for the regionalization to get?
Well, if someone were able to come in and provide a closer MRF for where they would take the recyclables.
But haven't you had people come in 2 or 3 times to look at the MRF?
We had someone come in that said well, we had somebody come in and trying to think the multiple times. We had one who came in, actually was, we asked Advanced, our.
It was CB&I.
Well, yep, CB&I, and actually earlier, and
RSS.
a couple folks, and they said, yeah, it really is beyond the life and would need to be replaced in the 6 figures. I could go back and see what the numbers were.
Right.
Then it was pointed out and raised, well, the specific people that came in, they were equipment people. Right. Certainly, they're going to want to tell you it's bad because they want to sell you new equipment. And there could be a point to that. So we asked Advanced Disposal, again, Kelly Rooney, who's, again, in the business broadly, their company. I asked her, and she brought in their national recycling manager, I believe. And I walked them through the facility. And what they reported back to me was, first, as a specific, the facility was shut down, and due to safety concerns and because of the condition of the equipment, it's been physically disconnected.
Right.
So literally to even fire it up again, or flip the switch, if you will, would be in the, not horrendous, but in the tens of thousands of dollars. We'd have to get electrical contractors to rewire, reconnect everything.
Right.
And what they said was, you got to do that before we can even tell you anything. And that's been a consistent all the way through. You can't, they can eyeball things, but really until you
run it to really see what the true repairs or needs are, or how well it operates. But also a couple of key points they added. One, it should be expected that it's going to wear soon and need significant replacement. Again, they can't put a number to it, but significant replacement in the short term, I believe, off memory was what they said. So.
Well, what does that mean? Like, what is soon and what is short term?
I'd have to go back. I took it as within a few years, but I'd have to go back.
It seems like that's the projected range of regionalization.
Again, until they have it reconnected. And the decision above me was, we're not going to put money into, hire somebody for $30,000 to turn it on to find out it's broken. But another key piece, and back to my earlier discussion in terms of capacity, they said, and this has really been helpful to me, and they put some numbers to it, that the size of the equipment, the size of the facility, and they actually hit it pretty well, probably because they know some of our numbers, but our volumes, our tonnages for the Ann Arbor community and what comes to that facility now is basically about half what would be needed to operate it. Mm-hmm. So to take a scenario, and not to say anyone's advocating for this, but if it were to make it simple, let's pay whatever it is because we want to recycle here. If we were to do it just for the Ann Arbor community, back to that sweet spot, we're only half of what we really need to operate it economically as a facility. It's only 4 hours, and nobody's going to work for 4 hours and all those sorts of things. So as a part of what happens with this facility, and this is what I've taken to the regional discussions and the groups multiple times, that really what brought the city there, and the message I'm taking is we have an opportunity, and I know it's not going fast enough, but this facility could be an opportunity for that regional approach because we're about half of that area's volumes from what the county plan has from the folks that are in there. So if I were to, a scenario that could be is, but I know it's long and the wheels of government moving slow and things coming together, but a scenario could be that that facility could be the Western, what do we call it, Western Wash, no, that's the other one. More money, you'll learn about it, but this new authority, that facility perhaps could do it. But again, it's going to take, where does that investment come, by whom, by how to invest that into that facility. But it's clear to me from the multiple times and different ways it's been looked at that it's not a simple matter of a couple $100,000 to kind of tweak the equipment.
Right, and I remember that too, and my recollection is that we've had a conversation with all of these people about participating in this on a short-term basis, and there was interest in that. Am I misremembering?
Refresh me, Susan, in terms of actually...
In terms of operating a sort of mini-MRF.
Oh, that one, yeah. Actually, that one hasn't come to fruition yet. I haven't, no.
Why? What's happened with that?
There was a meeting with the administrator, and basically things are verbal. So nothing's...
I'm sorry, things are
verbal? Things have been talked about at a very high level of potential, but nothing's kind of come together, I guess. And that's, quite frankly, in the city administrator's park, so I don't want to speak too out of turn.
Were you in that meeting?
Yeah, I was low on the totem pole at the end of the table. But.
I mean, I don't want to get into too many details here, but I've had rather lengthy discussions with Recycle Ann Arbor, and there was a meeting on the 14th of November. Everything was verbal. I have an outline of what was discussed. My understanding is that they're waiting for feedback from the city. I mean, I think what Councilman Smith said is correct. This is really difficult, and it gets also back to the whole RFP thing, because there's so many moving parts and there's so many uncertainties, and just a few aspects of the RAA verbal, and I emphasize this verbal proposal. My understanding is that the start date would not be until 2020, middle of the year. So it's not something that, this is something that people think, oh, it's urgent and we're going to get this done in 3 months and we're going to have a mini MRF in 3 months. So even their proposal is a couple of years out, and they're talking about capital costs in the $4 to $5 million range, and you don't recover those costs, you know, in a couple of months. So that means they're looking for a longer-term contract. But all these things are exceedingly complex right now. And I think to, again, loop back to the whole discussion about the Solid Waste Resource Management Plan update, about the RFP, I understand the desire to move ahead with the contracts and the RFP because they are expiring, and there are some downsides with extending them. There are some concerns about material, or the condition of the trucks, and if there's breakdowns, then there's overtime. So there are cons to extending the contract. There's not just pros to saying, you know, let's extend it for another 6 months or a year. There's people may get, you know, routes missed and they won't get collections, so there's gonna be more phone calls. There's a whole slew of different issues. But it just seems to me, as a layperson sitting here who's tried to really dig in, that it will convey or present the perception or create the perception that, in a sense, we've preempted this whole process with the update, with the input from this body, with the advisory commission. I just see a lot of pitfalls with going ahead as it is. And I think one of the things that you could help us with is understand what are the pros and cons. And, and especially council, and council, I assume this potentially is gonna have to go to council, and you're gonna need to understand what are the pros and cons for extending versus going ahead with the timetable that you outline. What are the risks and what are the potential benefits? And then how do you structure the RFP so that in light of all of these moving parts, you're gonna get an RFP that is gonna come back in several months where you can pick and choose different things from the quotations and put together a contract that makes the most sense in the midst of all of this going on. That's a tall order.
Okay, I'll give it, if time allows. Yep.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And all of that makes sense to me too, and I would just, it seems to me that there have been a lot of ideas that have been thrown out, but I'm not sure that the ideas and they've ever reached a conclusion. So, you know, in addition to not knowing what the plan is going forward, you know, even these little things that we've tried to discover along the way, I'm unclear on what the conclusions of those are. And that would be helpful to have as information before making another decision. And I'm also just concerned about this interim measure, that this fund is just bleeding out money, and I don't know that that's being addressed, or I'm not hearing that being addressed in a way that provides me with reassurance.
I guess I'll look to the chair. I can try off the top of my head some pros and cons, if that's the ask now before the item comes up, or if that's at a later point, but I've got some things or other
threw all
questions.
sorts of things at you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
President, does it take an act of the council, a resolution or something, to spend the $30,000 to rewire that facility to see then what's needed? I mean,
Actually,
is
now
that
that you've
something
raised
in your discretion?
now that you've raised it that way, Chris, Commissioner Graham, if it's $25,000 or more, it would.
So
it would actually be council.
Let's offer somebody 24.9 and
right,
do it.
Right, but I guess as a more practical matter, I've been told by people above me, we're not gonna put money into rewiring it just to turn it on.
But how do you know?
Not direct words, but.
So
But the
we need a
potential
resolution.
risk of that is
Yeah,
that we're
I mean,
spending
you know,
more than $1 million a year.
Yeah.
You got to distinguish what's a cost and what's an investment.
Yep.
So my second question is, okay, fine, it takes 24.9 to get it rewired. It takes another 24.9 to have people make an assessment. And okay, it takes then an action of council to spend $150,000 to get it operating again for the city of Ann Arbor stuff. When you do all of that, is it less than trucking to Cincinnati?
I guess what I add on to that is who's going to staff it and run it and operate it?
Yeah.
So
like
we've got to get somebody to do
on
that.
a short-term basis and all
Yeah,
that stuff.
yeah. Yeah.
It seems like, it seems like all of that's very complicated, but can I pin a badge of courage on you and give you a try?
Well, and again, that's, and I agree, and that's even the description I've used the multiple. Balls juggling in the air, spinning the plates. That's why this is my focus, is along with others, these various things, but because we don't have enough folks, but trying to spin as many as we can and to keep things
I
going.
can volunteer my
Yes.
time for the winter, if that would help you.
I might take you up on that. But perhaps if now is appropriate to try to at least lay out, off the top of my head, kind of pros and cons or considerations, I suppose, on continuing forward versus holding back in terms of the RFP.
Sure, that's fine. I think there are other questions to come.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in terms of pros, since that's, the direction we're going as the staff assignment, if you will. One, it gets us actual costs. We get the contractors that say, here's what it would be for these services that we haven't procured and bid as a whole for some time. The item of the year-round residential compost. The simplification, if you will, of services, and I look to the downtown, just the point of, not hearing, just to react back and circle back to Commissioner Brown's point about the advisory committee as far as 90% of the group. Well, the part of the group that was from the downtown, they were the ones that were telling us, we want just one provider in the downtown. And so they were aware of it, and that's actually what they're looking to do. So along with that would be that added level of service in the downtown, 7 days a week, actually procure that and get that set up. So those are some quick pros. Some cons, agreed. The regionalization, the authority, that can be a key piece, especially to the MRF revitalization piece. That may be a piece of the puzzle. And yes, it's going to come back as an item, a potential entity to you folks soon, but I will totally agree. That's going to take time to get up and running. There's going to be things they're going to be looking at first. It's going to be some broad items, education, outreach, getting all the communities on the same platform of materials. So it's going to take some time for them to get going, but so that could be a con to going out or a pro to delaying.
Could
Yes.
tonnages shift? I mean, is there anything that's in front of
yeah, actually,
the city or this whole update that could shift tonnages that would make the RFP essentially?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to take that question, John, and shift it just a little slightly, because this was a thought I've had too in terms of, and I don't know if this is necessarily a pro or a con, but more kind of a thing, that in terms of picking up the trash dumpsters, picking up the recycling, those two particularly, but also even if we say the transfer and taking the recyclables for processing, if you will, are pretty core services. Back to a pro of delaying and waiting for the management plan, strategic plan. Those services are so core and fundamental. I don't, and actually even in talking with Aptum, because I shared with them the resolution, we're not anticipating much in terms of changes, in terms of if you've got a dumpster with trash, it's going to get tipped and things. So other programs and things may certainly be there. It's not to say that there won't be some, but at its core, we're talking a service. I don't know that there'll be a lot of adjustment, but there could be some. So I'm not necessarily citing that as a pro or a con, but just a context item. So I guess those are my quick reactions in response to the ask.
So, go ahead.
I don't want to create additional work for you. I know that you have a lot to do, but I don't feel like we're getting answers to these questions. And I wondered if we submit them in writing and say, these are the things that we have heard before, and we're wanting to know exactly where this ended up, would that be something that would be a reasonable ask?
Yes, I actually find that most useful, because then it's something clear and specific. Of course, as we've talked to, sometimes you answer a question and it begets another question, but that's part of the process.
Of course.
As long as I'm not talking numbers and spreadsheets, maybe I'll be all right. But no, I'm totally fine with that, and that actually, because that even gives me time, Commissioner Hutton, to, you know, make sure I've gotten well-versed and I'm feeling comfortable in this area.
Yep.
I've always loved variety in my job here in the city, and I've got it now. But that affords me the opportunity to go to the true experts or to get the right information, so that's a helpful approach.
And so if we, by what date would you need us to give you those answers to have, or to give you the questions to have answers before our next meeting?
I guess the biggest thing, just with where we're at with the holidays and things, so that's the thing. And I guess thinking back even a little larger context, because your next meeting is going to be toward the end of January, but before that will be the advisory committee. Right. So thinking again holistically in the things, the balls I'm juggling. I guess I would ask in the next couple of weeks. So I'm planning to take the week between Christmas and New Year's, take a little break. But up till then, and just let that holiday kind of crunch. I'd like to try to get them before that time so that I can work on those to get them together both for that committee meeting as well as the commission.
Well, I will volunteer myself to be the aggregator of questions. If people would like to send them to me, I'd be happy to assemble them and send them on to you and to you.
Yep, that'd be great to work through, Missy, just so that I'm not missing something or losing track of something. That would be great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I had a comment, and I think I've made this point before, and I apologize for repeating, and also I know that this is not your decision to make probably, but everything that we're hearing about the complexity of these issues, compounded by the lack of staffing in the area, seems to me just a really compelling argument to hire a solid waste manager now rather than waiting. I do appreciate your presenting the rationale for waiting. I think I understand it now better than I have in the past, but it still seems to me that a qualified solid waste manager should be able to manage our solid waste program, you know, sort of whatever it ends up looking like. And I realize there are unknowns, but you know, people's jobs change all the time, and certain responsibilities are shifted. And it just seems like getting someone on board now who can get involved in this process, maybe even help shape the process, coordinate the process, and also have the benefit of interacting with you while you're still here. Because this is not meant as any reflection on the work that you're doing, but I think we need more people, and I think that the person who's going to be responsible for carrying this plan forward should be here now.
Agree.
Agreed. Yeah. And if it's not possible to do it on a full-time basis, to hire a contractor who is qualified. And I know at one point we were told that was going to happen, and I'm still not sure why it didn't happen, but it just seems like you are overtaxed and you could use some help, and it would be great to have someone who knows, at least help us limp through this period until we move into the next one.
Can I throw one other idea out in terms of freeing up resources to do the kinds of things that we're talking about here? The Aptum contract includes $95,000 for community engagement, and a significant chunk of that is a survey of residents. We know from discussions about another survey that that's $20,000 to $30,000. My sense is that I support fully what Commissioner Needham said, but why not cancel the survey of residents who don't understand 1/100th of what we are talking about, and we don't understand 1/100th of someone who's really into this full time? Why take that money and tell Aptum to shift their services to do the kinds of things that we really should be doing with real expertise, and not going to residents and saying, should we do this or that or the other? How can they possibly make that judgment when we are dealing with this? Some of us, I mean, I'll speak for myself, I've invested a ton of time in this, and I don't even see through it. And if someone would come to me with a survey and said, should we do X or Y or A or B, I would have an extremely hard time coming to a conclusion, and there'd be a very high likelihood that it would be a wrong conclusion. So I would say shift those monies and support the kinds of things that we're talking about here to accelerate things and to help you come to the right conclusions. And I'll throw out one other thing while I have the floor. I think one of the things that you could also maybe think about, tell us tonight or later, is there a big disadvantage in terms of the city's reputation or whatever with proceeding with the timetable that you said, so that we do get things going, but then have a point in March or whatever and say, too much has changed and we really can't go forward on the basis of the proposals that we have. We have to go back again. It wasn't anything that we did on purpose, but at least that way we're proceeding on a timetable to do the kinds of things that you've proposed that keep us on that favorable timetable of being able to renew or have new contracts in place. But we could abort and we could restart the process if there were significant changes. And if there weren't, then council in March, when they're presented with this, could say everything is as we planned it at the time. We can answer all the questions and we can put these in place. I mean, that's another alternative to think about.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Other questions?
Just as a follow-up to that, is there, as somebody who responds to RFPs, is there a risk with that approach in that there's not 25 outfits out there that will respond to something as complex and big as this? And if I'm responding to an RFP and I put a bunch of time into it and then they can it, I'm like, forget them. And so is that, I'm responding to much smaller RFPs in general, but I'm just wondering if that's a risk as well, if we just decide to abort, that you kind of can risk turning away otherwise very qualified people that just say, they just have to get their act together and I'm not willing to spend my time on them, you know?
I would say that is and I'll throw in the wiggle word, but potential risk. But I think that's a real potential risk.
Well, Crescent, I mean, the one thing that you mentioned about a positive thing about issuing an RFP was getting costing data. Isn't this something that Aptum has some access to as an independent consultant? They can tell you what the range is. And
yeah, and it's back to, and certainly they can pull information and ranges, but also, I mean, depending on if folks are comfortable with ranges, but I also know, again, the interest in things of looking at numbers and things to get to hard numbers, you got to have something that somebody's come in and said, here's the size of the community, here's the type of service I would provide, here's the fleet, how I'd route, to really get to solid numbers. So I guess I would turn it back as to a comfort level. If you're okay with, if someone's okay with ranges, we will absolutely get that from Aptum. But if it's, well, I want something a little tighter, we're not going to get there until we ask for it.
Any other questions?
I'd just like to make a comment. I know this isn't probably where you anticipated your career being at year 30.
I did not envision that shit 32 years ago.
But I certainly appreciate your willingness to step into an area that is outside of perhaps your wheelhouse and take on a really difficult task and try and fix a lot of years of bad decision. I think we're better for having you help us through this. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I truly appreciate that. And actually, I will say, I'm starting to feel comfortable in this space, which makes me kind of freak out. I'm almost considering myself an expert, but not there yet.
Thanks a lot.
Yes.
I have one comment, not really related to your presentation, but I think we haven't talked at all about this today, and it's worth mentioning. I think it's been mentioned maybe to some degree before, but we haven't talked about diversion rate at all. And diversion rate, the national average, according to the EPA, is just under 35%. And Ann Arbor has been stuck in the 27 to 29, 30% range since 2013. Now, the national average obviously includes lots of states where they're recycling aluminum cans and bottles, so that's maybe a little bit inflated, but just the mere fact that our diversion rate needle hasn't shifted at all in 5 years is really something that we have to look at collectively, from residents to the commission to the city, and say, why are we stuck where we are? I mean, some of it we know is like associated with some major decisions like organics and year-round composting and things like that, but we have not made any progress, and that needs to also have a sense of urgency, not just the dollars and the cents, but what are we getting out of this program, and what are we doing to make it better?
Yeah.
We haven't made it better in 5 years.
Yeah. You would start me to, I could add on to that as I'm becoming more of an expert, and so I'll keep this real short, but the key I've learned, it's the outreach in education, but really almost the model. We're doing things, and everyone is, the way we have been, and it's still important, you know, the school education, those sorts of things, but the whole area is so different. The focus really on quality, and again, back to lessons learned in hindsight. Single stream, it made so much sense. Participation. Well, the downside, the unintended consequence, we've got a lot more stuff, but we've got more contamination. We got stuff going in. Oh, they had a lawn chair on their little logo, so I can throw in my lawn chair, but it's got aluminum legs and the nylon strapping and the plastic arms. That's not recyclable. That's ending up in the landfill when it gets to the MRF. But it's not clear, and just, so to that point, I think the huge key, John, my own soapbox for a second, is that outreach, that education of all of us. It's ingrained in my head with the authority committee. One of the members from another municipality, said it really well. He said, I learned to recycle 30 years ago. That's still the way I do it, because that's what I learned. And I know it's probably not right, but that's ingrained in me. And we, all of us, we need to re-educate and stay on top of even that, just like everything else. But so I'll step off my soapbox. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Ingrid.
Well, I had a quick follow-up question. I'm really interested in better communications too, on all of that. And is the communications department or Ms. Wandrash or any of those people, is there anything on the drawing board yet?
We're continuing with that, but again, part of this project, well, the two parts, Councilmember Master, the Aptown, they have, again, a specific task to look at outreach, recycling, how are other communities doing it, comparing us, what are the best practices today that should be done, and then also the authority discussions. That has really, through the meetings I've been in and have that group, that recognition is there that the early focus I expect, we'll have to see when the group forms, if it forms, and who's on and what that direction, but that group is really talking about information, education, getting everybody on the same playing field. The big point that people work in Ann Arbor, but they live in Chelsea or Dexter, and everybody recycles different. So if you go to work, you don't know, can you recycle this or not? I can at home, but I don't know if I can here. Get us all common and consistent, and that's going to take time, but that's all part of that education too. So that's really where I see that going. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Brown, I think you had a related resolution you'd like to bring forward?
Yeah, I did. And you've all heard my concerns about why I've submitted this as a resolution. I mean, the last thing I want to do is to tie the city's hands in doing what they need to do, city staff. But I think after this discussion, I think it would be useful to know what council members think that they need to know in order to approve appropriations. So I think I'm happy with this as it stands, as a resolution. But I think it's going to certainly require some more understanding, I think, on everybody's part about what these RFPs really mean, you know? Because my initial concern was just that, why do you want to focus everything on one big vendor? Because there are definitely, you know, disadvantages and advantages. And I don't feel like, I feel like stating that as an explicit goal was an alarming statement to me, based on my experience.
So are you moving to
Yeah,
approve?
I'm moving to approve the resolution.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, you know, I think, I appreciate this very much coming forward, and Councilmember Bannister can probably talk to this as well. I think as we think as council, what information do we need, is that generally, when we are involved in the appropriations, you know, we are trying to make heads and tails of the bidding and awarding process without the full context of what did the RFP say. You know, who responded, why are the responses so different? You know, we just had some action last week trying to gain some clarity into that, in how that information is presented to us. So I think at the very least, you know, there would be concern as to whatever contract came before us with all sorts of methodological questions about how did we get to this point, which would in all likelihood set things back a little, because I don't know that we would necessarily agree that we were where we needed to be. I think ultimately what I think would be helpful is if Crescent can present that pros and cons to of doing this process, you know, because we don't generally have a discussion about this stuff before it goes out to bid, and I think that there are reasons to do it, just as there are reasons not to do it. And I think we need to have a broader policy discussion of that at council to make a decision on which way to go forward. So I would want to have that before we invested the time of drafting the RFP, which potentially, you know, I can see that taking much more time than a standard RFP for this would, simply because of the complexity of the situation. So I think before I would want that to go forward, and obviously it's not our job as council to manage the RFP process. But these are the questions that we're going to ask when a contract is put before us and a recommendation to enter into a contract with somebody. We're going to need to know these things. So we might as well just ask them up front and try and make the process a little bit better, a little bit more certain for people that are proposing. And, you know, if council makes the decision that, you know, the negatives outweigh the positives, then we'll say let's not go forward with it yet. But I'd like to have that discussion, particularly on this, before we took a step one way or the other.
Yes, I would agree with that, as council, we just passed the resolution that we didn't want just one choice presented to us. We wanted to see all the options that were with the recommended choice. So that's a new change. And I think a couple of the other things we were talking about, like your diverting 30,000, canceling a survey, was compelling for the reasons stated, that the residents, it's too complex for the residents to do a survey. So there's some 30,000 of the 94,000 for the community engagement. Again, I think that's a really good spot, and we seem to all agree that if we could get the residents recycling better, that's a key cornerstone of the program. And another, I think one of the things coming into this meeting was that the staff and the AFSCME staff want to be sure that we're not privatizing or hiring subcontractors. So that's I want that to be, you know, that should be clear. There were some concerns about that. And I think the spreadsheets, the more detailed spreadsheets of the line items would be good for some members.
briefly on the RFP process, I met with Crescent yesterday afternoon and discussed basically everything we talked about tonight. But one of the things that I also expressed, and I've mentioned this before about the RFP process, and I explained some concerns that I had in more detail with Crescent, is we've had now 2 solid waste RFPs where I had significant concerns about the weighting of the criteria and the evaluation of that, leading to what I think could have been potentially incorrect selections. So I think that's something that also needs to be corrected in this RFP. And I don't need to get any more details, but Crescent knows what those are, and I think there's a few other people up here that know what some of those concerns were. Basically, cost was in the end, in a couple of those, it was vastly underweighted, and no matter what someone came in with a cost, if someone came in with a great proposal, they were going to get the contract over someone that came in with a decent proposal but at a much lower cost. And those kinds of basic RFP process issues need to be corrected before we go out with other RFPs. I'll just leave it at that.
So this resolution goes to the council, and the council has to figure out what to do with it. My question to you is, there are contracts expiring that need to be replaced, and it takes months to do that. If we vote for this resolution, we are suggesting that that somehow gets overturned and we wait. Am I correct about that? You're in a better position than anyone else here to say, is that okay to do? Can we actually ask the council to do that? Would they be inclined to do that? Is that the correct course to take? I don't know the answer to those questions.
I think it's not that they would be replaced, they would be extended. I think that's the question.
Well, that has consequences too.
Of course, yes.
And those should be on the table prior to.
I mean, that's all part of the pro and con discussion.
Yeah.
So does this trigger that discussion, council members, if we pass this resolution? Is this what you need?
Honestly, I'm not sure that we need this. I think that Councilmember Bannister and I simply need to, bring this up as a council communication, convey this discussion to our colleagues and direct the administrator to, prepare the pros and cons information for us.
I might also add that this, what we are saying here is that, we are trying to avoid the issuance of an RFP for one single contract for all these things. That's what we are saying that we are trying to do with this particular recommendation. I think there are many, many pros to do that, and if we did not do that, there would be a lot of consequences to offering to putting out an RFP that said we want one contractor to be able to do all these things. There are all sorts of questions that would be on the table if we didn't do this, as well as if we did do this. So I think it's certainly, while I'm as reluctant to tie staff's hands with a resolution at the same time, I think there are just too many questions on both sides of this issue to do nothing. And this sends a good message to council to be able to let them know all the things that they're going to have to consider in moving forward in this department.
That makes sense, but should we make that particular thing maybe even more clear? And possibly amend it also to say about retrieving the 30,000 for the survey? Any amendments along that line?
It's pretty clear in the last clause, actually.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to include the 30,000. I mean, that could be a recommendation that discussed, between the solid waste leadership and a couple of council people with the administrator as an option. I mean, that contract's already let. I think the main thing here is do we want to send a signal that that's not binding, that the city consider postponing proceeding with the RFP. And one option is, as I mentioned earlier, that they proceed with it with the, hopefully the remote possibility that they have to abort and restart. Hopefully the RFP is written in a really intelligent way that it allows for shifts and changes that might happen, and that we can realize all the pros and mitigate or eliminate all the cons. I don't know, but you know, there are risks, as was pointed out, with doing that. I mean, people are going to invest time in answering the RFP, and it's difficult to signal in advance that they may be wasting all of their effort in doing so.
So is it then an update to say, to trigger that conversation of the pros, cons, not saying we're going to hold off, but urging that conversation about pros and cons happen before deciding whether or not to move forward with the RFP?
So change the resolved
Yes.
to that. I think that makes sense.
I wonder if we could accomplish that simply by changing the direct language to consider, request the City Council of Ann Arbor consider not undertaking a new collection and so on until the planning process is complete. And then in the next one, request the City Council of Ann Arbor consider postponing bundling and so on.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, and including, the management plan has been included and is actionable until they have been presented with pros and cons, or until changes have been reviewed and approved by City Council.
Can you say that again?
Yes. In the final clause, until the solid waste resource management plan has been completed and is actionable, comma, until they have presented with pros and cons, comma, or until changes have been reviewed and approved by council.
Commissioner Brown, would you be amenable to those amendments?
Yes, I would be.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah. Call a question.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Our next item of new business is,
Can I just add one other thing? And that is, if staff feels that it's helpful in sharing the RFP with a few of us, maybe Steve and with me, and to go through it, even just as someone or people that can ask questions, hopefully somewhat intelligent questions, to hopefully improve the quality of the RFP, that we would be willing to do that. I just offer that. I mean, you may be able to do that internally, but if you want someone to do that, I mean, it could be any number of us up here, but it's an offer.
our next item of new business is brought forward by Councilmember Smith, a resolution to declare an Ann Arbor climate emergency.
I'll be as brief as possible. I appreciate your flexibility in allowing this to be a late add to the agenda. To give you a little bit of background, both Dr. Stoltz and I have met with the local chapter of the Climate Mobilization, which is a community and network of organizers, researchers, volunteers, and policymakers across the country and the world, trying to work on the ground with a response to climate change, what they call initiating a massive economy and society-wide climate mobilization to restore a safe climate. It's a 501c3 and a 501c4, both. They're sister organizations. They really helped put this together. This is a fairly standard declaration of climate emergency that they have been working with all of their local chapters, have been working with those municipalities to try and pass similar language at the municipal level. We'll cut to the chase. There was a report that came out, was described in the New York Times today, that we talk a lot about climate change, but last year carbon emissions increased 1.6%, and this year they're expected to rise 2.7%. So we're making no progress. We're making a little bit of headwind here, but not as much as we need to. And before anybody says it's all China and India, The United States is responsible for 1/3 of all human-caused carbon emissions to date. So, you know, keeping that in mind, I have no problem bringing this forward and trying to be more aggressive in our carbon reduction targets, which we have set some ambitious goals in our climate action plan, but with all of the information that has come out in the last month, I think the need is there to, A, declare this an emergency and have council do the same, but also to step up in the way that the university has to say by 2025, the city's municipal operations will be carbon neutral, and set a goal of 2040 for the entire municipality achieving that carbon neutrality. I think we need to set bold targets to promote bold action. I don't think we have time to waste. I go home every night and I see 2 little girls that have absolutely, you know, they've done none of this and they're going to inherit all of the burdens. So to me, it's imperative that we declare this for what it is, which is a global emergency, but also understand that Ann Arbor has a huge role to play in this. So with that, I present this motion, or this resolution. I move it. Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Oh, my. Let's get going. God dang it, it's been saying that since 1988.
Our final item of new business is potential policy action agenda ideas to be taken at the state level. And Dr. Stoltz, could you introduce this a little bit?
Sure. So all of our boards and commissions have been asked to put together their ideas for what we would like to bring to council, and then also have internally for staff to consider as we work with our state legislature and our team of advocates. And so what we've got before you is ideas. At the bottom of the sheet is what was presented from this commission last year. And then at the top are just some new ideas that we sort of generated, and we welcome any ideas, but we figured it was a lot easier to give you something to react to than ask you on the spot to come up with the things you think that we should focus on. So just take that as kind of general ideas.
And you're not necessarily looking for a vote tonight, is that correct?
We do have until the end of this month to get something forward, so we do not necessarily have to vote on this. I would just say, if you have other ideas, please let us know so we can then put that in the package that goes to council.
I have one brief question.
Mm-hmm.
We have the staff-generated ideas, and what was submitted last year. What was submitted last year carries over?
Not by default.
Not by default.
No, I mean, you can choose to have them all on, you could choose to have them off. I think we would be looking for discussion of what goes. Nothing at this, like, carte blanche are we assuming moves forward. So at some point, we do need to have some dialogue, and we can do that remotely about what you like and dislike. Really, this is a straw man, if you will, or a straw woman.
So commissioners should contact you with
Yes,
further
they
ideas.
should.
Okay.
You
That-
said, I'm sorry, by the end of the month. and
Yeah, I'll
so-
send you a deadline,
Okay.
so I can then clean it up. I'll put it in a Google document so everyone can kind of take a peek.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I have one idea. How about adding water bottles to plastic to the deposit bill?
Yeah. Oh,
How about any beverage container,
Yeah.
even if it's water?
well,
That's a good-
there's a bill up there to remove the bottle fee altogether,
Yeah.
which has some traction.
Okay, next, just an announcement of our proposed meeting dates for 2019 that you see in front of you. This follows our typical arrangement of fourth Thursdays, with the exception of November and December, which are combined into one meeting the first Thursday in December. So if anyone has issues with those, you could let Ms. Drennan or myself know, but that's what we're planning at this time. Do we have any committee reports? Okay. The only thing I wanted to mention is I am still trying to work on some sort of a proposed work plan for the commission for next year. Our January agenda, which I'll get to momentarily, is already quite full, so we've spoken to Dr. Stoltz about possibly using summer all of the time in our February meeting for a bit of a facilitated brainstorm session on things that we might do the rest of the year. If anyone has any thoughts on that, please feel free to let me know. Dr. Stoltz, do you have a report?
Alas, I do. I'll make it quick because I know we're at the witching hour. Just a reminder that if you have questions for staff, anyone, just if you could direct those to Emily or myself, that way we can help make sure that you actually get responses. So similarly, whatever we generate based on that discussion, we'll help make sure that gets taken care of. A few things, we were very busy last week submitting proposals. So we applied for an equity fellow over the summer, and we'll know shortly if we'll receive that. We put in 2 proposals to work with UM master's students, one on creating our local carbon offset program here, and the other on creating an internal price on carbon for city operations to generate revenue that we can then use to help other city departments reduce their footprint. We are working actively, and hopefully tomorrow or Monday a grant will go in, the first part of a $300,000 grant. It's a split through Partners for Places, and we'll also be asking the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation for our Aging in Place Efficiently program that you learned about in the work plan. We also put in 2 proposals to an innovation fund, one on enhancing resilience-based financial literacy. So we are actually doing that with CFO Tom Crawford. It's a partnership, really to figure out how we fund these things more sustainably and creatively. And then the other one is on more resources for the resiliency hubs. So we have funding from council, thank you council members, to start the process of planning and designing a resiliency hub, and then we'll obviously need money to implement them. So this is because of council's decision to fund that initial seed funding, we then could unlock potentially significantly more capital. So that's really exciting. For those who do not know, a budget adjustment was approved by council for $250,000 for the office. $200,000 of that goes for our net zero energy affordable housing program. We are really excited. We've been meeting with the team. We're designing all of the work, so stay tuned, groundbreaking in the spring, and we'll do something flashy and fun out there. $15,000 for EV chargers for our fleet, $10,000 for resiliency hubs, and then $25,000 to support our strategy of getting to 100% clean and renewable internally. So we're pretty excited about where that's moving. We are now turning our attention, obviously, to fundraising, and then also preparing for the 2019, fiscal year 20, fiscal year 21 budget. So we're in the trenches of figuring all of that out. For those of you who are free tomorrow night and don't have an amazing date, we have a community climate conversation that's happening at the downtown library with 14 partner organizations in our community. We're bringing in 2 of the authors of the National Climate Assessment, which are local and was just released. And we're going to have them talk a bit about the Midwest chapter, as well as public health and what that means, climate change means for public health. And then we're going to do a little bit of kind of what our office can offer in terms of engagement with the community. And then we're breaking out into a discussion with the community about what they think are the most important things we should be doing. And with our partners, we put together 2 handouts for them that they can take away and understand what they can do kind of in their personal lives, as well as who they can go to try to understand this landscape of climate actors in Ann Arbor, which we're pretty rich with. And then last 3 things. Sadly, Matt Nod retired on Friday. If you don't know, please do reach out to him. He would love to hear from you. And then for members of the public and you as well, we are still accepting applications for the Sustaining Ann Arbor Together grant program. 2 came in that are fabulous, and I will tell you more about them as soon as we get award letters out the door. We're very excited. And then the last thing, get excited, because in January, we're going paperless with you. So we're going to try to have everything on your computer screens, but if you need something a little more interactive, please do bring a device to the meeting. We should probably walk the walk, so we're going to set that up.
That's great. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Taking that step. We do have a full agenda already for January. Brian Stieglitz from the City Water Utility will be here to give us a presentation and answer questions about PFAS contamination in the Huron River and filtration efforts at the water plant. Jen Lawson will be here to talk about stormwater. City Administrator Lazarus will give us a presentation on budget issues relating to sustainability and the environment. And we may hear back on the Solid Waste Regional Authority if that develops in time. Does anyone have anything else they would like to tackle in January? It's more than enough, yes.
One comment about the agenda. The bylaws that we just passed has a point in there and that says representatives, or there should be report out from representatives of other commissions, Park Advisory, Energy,
Oh,
Planning.
I skipped over that.
And
I'm
I did,
sorry.
did we, I don't know if we, it's not on here, I don't
It
think.
is report from committees.
Well, it's not
It's not,
committees.
it's,
So
actually, yeah.
we need to modify the agenda so that it appears as a separate point. I had prepared some stuff, but given the time and the facts, the things that I had prepared are not all that urgent, I'll just skip it. Other than just to maybe say, I sent out something about the listening tour that I mentioned in the last meeting, and we're in the meeting minutes. And if anybody's interested in participating in that, the sustainability listening tour, get with me or with the sustainability office.
Did our other commission liaisons have anything to report?
Wait till next time.
Councilmember Bannister?
It's too late. Yes, well, next time I'd like to take a little bit more to tell you guys on things. One thing we're working on heavily in Ward 1 that actually could affect the whole city later on, which is our sidewalk program. And we got a $400,000 grant on the hook from Lansing for $1 million sidewalk problem, or solution. The solution we're looking for is safety for children to get to school. But unfortunately, the way the program, everyone roundly agrees that lessons learned, we didn't involve the the neighborhood until the 11th hour in the process. And so now we've come to find out that this is not our best ways to achieve safety, and it is has a severe impact on the trees and wildlife and shrubbery that would be affected should these sidewalks go down lined up as planned. So it's been a very messy process. We are meeting again tomorrow morning for another 3 hours, trying to figure out how we can mix together safe routes to school and try to preserve our trees and so this could be coming to a neighborhood near you too. And so when we're putting pedestrian mobility connectivity paths for bikes and pedestrians and all into established neighborhoods, it raises a lot of interesting issues for our broader environment. So that's one thing I've been working really hard on, and at our next meeting I could let you know how it all turned out.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Smith, did you have anything further?
If you live through the process.
Yeah. All right, our next meeting will be 7 p.m., January 24th, right back here. Anyone for public comment before we, please come up.
Yes, thank you. David Schoenberger here again, from resident of the city. If I may briefly switch gears back to an earlier item, thank you. Just to get on the record with a brief public comment to address commissioners' feedback on the emergency planning resolution. As I understand, the commission inserted language to the resolution for the city to advocate that the Washtenaw County government take responsibility for providing potassium iodide protection coverage to Ann Arbor residents. I appreciated hearing that feedback, and I do agree with the sentiment, but I want the commission here to clearly understand that one process goal of this citizen project is actually to enlist the county as an advocate along with the city on this issue in order to change policy at the state and federal levels to achieve a much wider scope of provision of coverage without at the same time adding additional fiscal strain to smaller levels of government, including the county and the city. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
He's right, we inserted Washtenaw County in the wrong place, I think.
Got it.
Any further public comment? All right. We stand adjourned. Thank you for your patience, everyone.